Uh,
So I will quickly introduce, I will, yeah, thank you, Rahul. And I will quickly introduce Mr. Vinod Philip from Berlin, Germany. He's joining us today. And good evening, everybody, and a very good afternoon to Vinod Philip. We are following through on our commitment to bring the best minds from around the world to our portals under the aegis of the Distinguished Speaker Series, Executive Education, Dayanand Sagar University, Bengaluru. Vinod will speak on sustainable energy, a topic that has seized all of us, particularly those of us who live in India. Vinod Philip has a very impressive profile. He is the Executive Vice President and Chief Technology and Strategy Officer at Siemens Energy, located in Berlin, Germany. He started working for Westinghouse Electric Corporation in 1997, later Siemens, and quickly assumed management positions with increasing responsibility, among them head of gas turbine engineering from 2010 to 2013, CEO of the generator business segment from 2013 to 2015, and Chief Technology Officer for Power and Gas from 2015 to 2017. In his most recent role as CEO of the Service Power Generation Business Unit 2017 to 2019, Mr. Philip was responsible for delivering value-creating service solutions to maximize the life cycle of customers' assets. Vinod Philip holds a master's degree in materials science and engineering from the University of Central Florida and also received a master's degree in business administration in international business from Rollins College, Florida. What is not mentioned here is that he also went to IIT Bombay, um, the very prestigious institution here in India. I would now hand over to Vinod, and my apologies, we have our Wi-Fi down because of Airtel repairs. So Vinod, all yours, and we look forward to hearing a wonderful session, please.
Thank you very much, Nagraj, for that kind introduction. And also, thank you for this invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to talk a bit about this topic of sustainable energy. And as one can imagine, it's a really broad field with a lot of different elements to consider. And I'm looking forward to having a dialogue with the group on this call. So thank you all for making the time to be here and join me. So what I'm going to start with is maybe talk a bit about Siemens Energy, because I think it's important to set the context of the company. And Siemens Energy, which is a part of Siemens AG, the global conglomerate, is an extremely relevant company in the global energy landscape. We are the only company that can support the entire energy value chain, starting from the production of the resources, generation of electricity, and then transmission through grids to the point of use, and also providing services and solutions across the entire value chain to support our customers. So it's a very broad portfolio. We have an experience base that goes back over 150 years. Werner von Siemens, who was the founder of Siemens AG, was actually starting the company in the energy business, in the electricity generation space. And ever since then, Siemens has played a pivotal role in the energy field and has been through a number of different transformations that had to go in line with what was happening in the world at large. As a company, we have almost 90,000 employees working in over 90 countries around the world. And this is also one of our biggest differentiators. We have extremely passionate, talented, and competent colleagues all over the world who are working day and night to provide our customers and our societies with the energy it needs. In many ways, what we talk about is we energize societies and we keep the lights on. And this is something that has been even more proven during these recent weeks when the entire world was grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic And during these times, given that a lot of our assets and units are very much a part of the critical infrastructure of countries, our teams have been phenomenal in the way they have stepped up and supported customers and obligations all over the world. Now, when we talk about energy, we have to talk about it in the context of sustainability and climate. At the recent COP25 meeting, the clear statement from the UN Secretary General was, it is a time for action. It is not a time for more debates, more analysis, more discussion. It is all about getting to start acting on what needs to be done. And when we talk about climate change, it is something that all of you are very, very familiar with. And all the pictures you see on this slide are just various facets of what we consider the effects of climate change. Droughts, fires like the ones in Australia, the melting of the ice caps, and this is becoming an increasingly relevant concern for the entire planet. And what you see on the top right of the screen with the Fridays for Future picture with Greta, this is all not just about the planet today, it is also about the generations of tomorrow. And so Siemens Energy takes this challenge with a great sense of responsibility and a great sense of pride and privilege on this. What we have to consider now is some background information. If you look at this chart, it talks about how the global carbon dioxide emissions have been evolving over time over the past 50 or 60 years. And what you can see is that in spite of having had this intention to try and improve the environment and try to help the climate improve, there has been a lot of trends going in the wrong direction. And as you can see, there has been an increase in CO2 emissions from fossil fuels consistently for the last 50 years, all over the world. You do see some areas where the emissions have marginally reduced, but in general, this has been a trend that has been going the wrong way. But it's important to also put this in context. So when we talk about global CO2 emissions, it's important to look at it in the form of sectors. And what do I mean by sectors? The share of CO2 emissions that are coming from the power sector is about 40% of the global CO2 emissions. Now, when you start breaking up the remaining 60%, about 25% comes from industry, about 20% comes from the transportation industry, buildings make up 10%, and the rest make up 5%. So what you see here is that while there is a lot of focus on power generation and energy and the emission reduction in the energy sector, it is equally important to look at the remaining 60% to make sure that we are also addressing other sectors in terms of CO2 emissions. So one of the things that we, as from a Siemens perspective, think about is the only way to really change this trend that you see on the left side is by looking at something that is called sector coupling. The more you can link up sectors where you can use energy to, for example, through electric mobility to enable transportation, or use excess heat from a power plant for combined heat and power in countries like Russia or northern parts of Europe, finding ways to use excess power to produce through mechanisms like electrolysis, produce valuable chemicals by producing hydrogen that can then be combined with carbon dioxide to create methane or other sort of valuable chemicals. What it shows is that one of the best ways to use natural resources in the most effective manner is by looking at how we can combine different sectors and address the needs of one sector through the output of the other. And this is something that we believe is going to be a really significant lever and a significant theme of the future decade of energy. Now, Another thing that has been happening in our industry is that companies are increasingly committing to CO2 reduction, either carbon neutrality in their own operations or in carbon or significant carbon dioxide reductions in their emissions. And when we talk about carbon neutrality, we have to look at it from three perspectives. And these are called scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So scope 1 and 2 are all about CO2 reduction in our own operations. So what we produce in as an entity, and scope 3 is the CO2 production that either we are seeing in our supply base or the CO2 production coming from the products that we supply to our customers. So Siemens Energy, of course, because of its portfolio, and these are our customers that you see, and this is just a selection of customers in the US and Europe, they are all under pressure to reduce their carbon dioxide emissions. And that in turn puts pressure on us. We see 2019 as a tipping point. And to give you a sense of what I mean by that, in April 2019, the number of large corporations that had announced some form of a carbon reduction or a carbon neutrality ambition was about somewhere between 15 and 20 corporations in April 2019. 8 months later, by December 2019, there were almost 400 corporations that had announced carbon neutrality targets. This sort of an exponential curve was clearly an indication to us that there was a tipping point that had been reached in 2019, which was clearly increasing the momentum, the pressure for rapid decarbonization and a huge focus on sustainability. Now, of course, fast forward 2 more months, and then when the whole world was rocked by the COVID-19 pandemic, it kind of put the sustainability agenda point a little further down the agenda, because societies around the world were coping with this new threat of the pandemic. However, we are very convinced that as the world recovers, and it will recover from the pandemic in the months to come, the topic of sustainability is going to be back high on the agenda of countries around the world. Now, speaking of countries around the world, I think it's also important to put another aspect. It is not just about sustainability that we have to focus. It is about additional societal needs for availability and affordability. Today, there are over 850 million people who have no access to electricity. So while on the one hand, it is absolutely essential to have a focus on sustainability and make sure that we do what is needed there, we also have to make sure that we are addressing the needs for availability and affordability. We cannot have energy systems that are too expensive for consumers, and we cannot have energy systems that cannot produce the required amount of energy in a reliable manner for making sure that everybody has access to it. That is one of the core principles that Siemens Energy looks at, is how do we manage this trilemma of sustainability, availability, and affordability. So if you go a bit deeper into this, this is a view of how Siemens sees the world in the context of energy. On the left side of this chart, you see the globe, and we organize the countries into 4 what we call archetypes. The first is low carbon leaders. These are countries like Denmark, Norway, that are looking to very aggressively decarbonize their economy. The second archetype of countries are what we call energy hungry countries, because they have a really fast developing economy, large populations, and they need energy to be able to fuel that GDP growth. India, China, Brazil, Turkey, Nigeria, these are all countries that we would think of great examples of energy hungry countries. The third is energy exporter. These are countries that have got surplus energy, either in the form of energy like Egypt, or in the form of fuel for energy like the Middle East or Venezuela. And finally, we have countries that are more traditional, like in Poland or Mexico, where they have a very strong backbone of energy generation in the conventional technologies like coal-fired and gas-fired power plants. And they are looking for a highly efficient energy infrastructure that is low cost. So what we as Siemens try to do is to look at the environment and the regional needs of a certain customer or a country, and we understand that they will require different strategies and different solutions. The way we would approach a country like Denmark to provide them with wind turbines might be different than how we would approach a country like India or China, where we might be thinking about high efficient steam turbines, or even solar, or a combination of solar, wind, and steam turbines. And what you see on the right side, as I mentioned to you before, in all projections, in general, what we see is that there is going to be a continued need, a continued growing need for energy and electricity. And when you think about emerging areas like electromobility, with more and more electric vehicles coming online or coming on the road, it's probably going to further increase the need for electricity. So all in all, we see this market as an extremely interesting market with a lot of challenges that good companies like Siemens, with a broad range of technologies and a broad access, as I mentioned before in my introduction slide, being in 90+ countries, we have highly capable, committed people in almost every major country on this planet, and they are close to our customers, they are close to and in the societies to be supported, and we are able to try to find targeted solutions for these different archetypes. When I go a bit deeper into customers, the way we look at our customer base as Siemens Energy are primarily 4 kinds of customers. These are utilities and industrial independent power producers. The second is industrial users. So these are large petrochemical plants, chemical plants, paper mills, and so forth. Oil and gas, of course, is another sector that we serve through our oil and gas business. And then the TSOs, or the transmission system operators. These are generally nationalized, regulated grid operators who are responsible for the electricity grid in their countries. And when you look at these customer groups and you look at their respective needs, what you see is a range of different sorts of needs that they have. There are some commonalities, but generally speaking, they're different, right? So utilities and IPPs are looking for fuel flexibility and efficiency. They're also looking for power plants that are fast out, so that they can be good backup power for renewables. So when the wind goes down or the sun goes down, they're able to ramp up these fast power plants to be able to produce and to deliver the required power. Similarly, when we talk about the industrial users, they're under pressure for carbon dioxide reduction. So they're looking for upgrades and modernizations of their assets to be able to decarbonize or gain flexibility. Some examples are being able to burn hydrogen as a fuel in the gas turbines instead of just methane, or a combination of the two. Hybrid solutions, which would be a combination of a small or medium gas turbine in the 5 to 20 megawatt range, coupled with a battery that can provide 4 to 8 megawatt hours of storage that can then take the factory through a night shift, for example. Oil and gas is looking for faster and higher return on investment, both on their capex and opex, especially due to the recent situation with oil prices. For them, it's very clear that the oil prices are never going to come back to the levels where they were a few years ago. So they have to be very mindful of their capex and opex, and they try their best to extend the lives of their assets to make sure that they can maximize the return on the investments already made. At the same time, they also need to make sure that they're decarbonizing their process chains, their process, their chemical and industrial processes, to make sure that they have the license to operate. And finally, when we think about the transmission system operators, they have to find ways to make sure that their grids are able to meet a energy system that has got a increasing amount of renewables that bring with it a certain amount of daily or weekly fluctuations. So the grid needs to be resilient, stable, and able to handle the load of wind turbines and solar fields coming in and going out. And this requires a certain amount of investment, because a lot of the infrastructure that exists in most countries were infrastructure that was invested in 40, 50 years ago. So upgrading and modernizing these grids to be able to handle a highly hybrid energy system is one of the key challenges TSOs are dealing with. So now if we go one level deeper, from a Siemens Energy perspective, we have identified 4 key areas of focus: decarbonizing conventional power generation, expanding on renewables, making sure that the grids are more resilient, and driving innovative technologies. I'm going to go a bit deeper to each one of them. So when we talk about decarbonizing conventional power generation, what does that mean? We have something called an energy radar. And the way you read this is you look at the center at the bottom of this radar. It's what we call the present state of the energy systems. And as you go towards either the right extreme or the left extreme, that's how we see the future energy systems. And what you see here is that there is no one size fits all or no single fix. We group the energy system greening into 3 different dimensions: technologies and solutions that can help improve the efficiency of the system, technologies and solutions that can allow these systems to run with different kinds of fuel or hybrid systems, or at the very right, what you see, highly decarbonized solutions. And we as Siemens Energy spend a lot of our investment in R&D. We spend almost €1 billion a year on R&D in developing technologies that can be used for improving the performance of gas turbines, steam turbines, make them more efficient, more flexible. We can take out old turbines and put in new turbines. We are developing combustion technologies that can lead to the burning of 100% hydrogen. We are developing systems that can couple a gas turbine with a battery. We also have decentral power systems, which are mobile power systems, where we have gas turbines and steam turbines in simple cycle or combined cycle mode on floating barges. And of course, we also have a very strong renewable portfolio with our wind power business, where we are #1 globally in the offshore wind business and #3 globally in the onshore wind business. And we also have a lot of system integration capabilities that can allow us to combine solar fields, wind, and gas. And finally, at the far right, what you see are the future technologies that we are developing. For example, thermal storage, carbon capture, and so forth. So this is a range of options that we develop and we have available so that we can take these to our customers and work with them in figuring out what combination of technologies or what combination of solutions make most sense for them in their specific circumstance. Talking about renewables, it is about becoming very clear that the share of renewables is still not high enough. In 2018, worldwide, the amount of energy produced from renewables was only 14%. There are projections that say for the planet to be able to reduce its average temperature by more than 2.5 degrees Celsius, we will need to have this number go up from 14 to almost 50, if not 60% of global energy production. In the absence of that, what you see is the amount of impact that can have because we have extreme weather conditions or extreme weather-related disasters, fires, floods, and so forth, leading to 160 billion of annual costs for fixing some of these issues. And of course, as I mentioned before, and you saw in the previous chart, the number of, the amount of emissions from greenhouse gases continues to increase, and this is something that is not sustainable. Therefore, wind and solar are absolutely going to be the backbone of new capacity additions. And when we did some modeling of future scenarios, we saw that almost 60% of all new capacity additions are going to be solar with maybe the remaining 40%, probably 60 to 70% being wind, and then just a slight increase in the amount of coal-fired or gas-fired generation to be able to provide some backup. And also coal-fired generation is now primarily coming down to a handful of countries that for a lot of valid reasons still have to rely on coal in order to be able to meet the demands of their societies. About making grids and infrastructure resilient, I think this comes back to, as I mentioned before, sector coupling. What you see here is how we can have different sorts of industries stay connected. And right in the center is what we have, the hydrogen molecule. And this is what we would say is the hydrogen that is produced. If you look to your left side, you have something called green power, where we have solar, wind, and hydro that produces at points in time excess electricity that can be then used to either run a hydrolyzer that produces hydrogen, and that hydrogen that you see in the middle can be fed back into burning gas turbine, to be burned in gas turbines, or that hydrogen can be combined in fuel cells to lead to mobility. Siemens is also a world leader in fuel cells, in fuel cell powered trains, because we have a very strong mobility business. And we also see that there is an increasing opportunity to have fuel cells also in ships, cars, and trucks you're well aware of. That hydrogen can also be used on the bottom right of the chart you see being brought into the petrochemical industry to produce e-fuels, and also going into the chemical industry for agriculture and other such applications. So we believe that as we continue to build out this sort of a highly interconnected, integrated infrastructure network based very much on green energy, producing green hydrogen that can then be used in different industries and verticals, we have a good chance of being able to meet the growing need for energy and electricity, while at the same time having a very positive effect or improvement in the climate trends that we see around us. And I'm coming towards the end of my presentation because I also want to have some time for Q&A. The fourth area is our focus on driving innovative technologies. And when we talk about innovative technologies, it's a whole host of portfolio of options. On the bottom right, you see some 3D printed, additively manufactured 3D printed turbine blades. Siemens is a market leader in 3D printing. We have some of these 3D printed parts running in our turbines right now with world record operational hours. This 3D printing offers a lot of different opportunities. It allows us to design blades faster with features that provide it a great amount of performance improvements. Our 3D printed combustion systems have led to a decrease in emissions from combustion of our gas turbines by 40 to 50%. We are also able to print obsolete parts, thereby not having to keep supply chains active with all the carbon footprint that they bring. So 3D printing is a core part of our innovation strategy, which we see is key for also addressing many of the other priorities I talked about. We are also world leaders when it comes to remote field services. We have had very good examples recently where we have had a large increase of remote field outages performed by these sorts of audio visual technologies, HoloLens, and so forth. One good example is that a few years ago, due to the civil war in Libya, we were not willing to send our maintenance technicians from Germany and surrounding areas to Libya for their safety. And at the same time, we knew that our customers there needed these power plants to be serviced and maintained so that they could provide energy to their people. And we were able to, through automation, through robotics, through audio video technology, we were able to actually perform an outage from over 10,000 kilometers away. We also do a lot of remote monitoring. We have almost 3,000 assets in our fleet that are connected to our remote monitoring centers. We have over 900,000 sensors installed in these different assets. We produce almost 50 gigabytes of data every day that we analyze and we produce data analytics on, to be able to help manage the assets, improve the performance, and optimize the performance of power plants around the world. We can turn on and off a power plant in New Zealand from our technology in Germany, so that the customer, if they want us to come in and do a remote diagnostic, we can do that and tell them what might be problems in their turbines. So all in all, we believe that the combination of our deep domain knowledge, our deep technology expertise, combined with some of these emerging fields around digitalization, 3D printing, communication, all of this together with artificial intelligence and machine learning gives us a lot of additional value that we can then provide to our customers. So to bring my talk to a close, I think at the end of the day, the world is definitely facing a lot of challenges. At the same time, there are also tremendous opportunities that come with it. And we believe that the future of energy is very vibrant and offers a lot of opportunities for us to be able to fulfill our purpose of helping societies around the world. And in the words of Peter Drucker, we believe that the best way to predict the future of energy is to be able to shape it. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. And I look forward to answering some of the questions that were posed through the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vinod. So let me start with one of the basic questions I saw here is, what does Siemens see as the future of fossil fuels?
Yeah, so it's very difficult to answer that in a specific sense in the short term. So I would say that in the long term, so most scenarios show that by the year 2040 and after, fossil fuels are going to be somewhere in the 20 to 25% or less of global energy generation, which means that 75 to 80% of generation is going to be coming from renewable sources. This trend from where it is today to getting to this global number of 80% coming from renewables is going to be happening at different rates and different speeds in different countries. For example, today in a country, I believe in a country like Denmark or Norway, they are already at 70, 80% renewables. So clearly the future of fossil power is on the decline. That being said, it is also very clear that until and unless there is a sustainable, affordable solution developed for large scale storage, it will be very hard for fossil fuels to not be in the portfolio. For the next 5 to 10 years, we believe that there will be a transition taking place where more and more customers will want to wean themselves off fossil fuels like coal. So that will probably be the one area that declines the fastest. Gas-fired generation will probably be there for much longer. And especially, as I mentioned before, since we are going to be shifting our technology to be able to burn hydrogen, we will have gas turbines, but they might become more like hydrogen turbines, with gas and coal becoming less and less relevant in the 10 to 15-year time frame.
Okay, so I mean, obviously there is a lot of interest in alternative energy sources. So, and solar, as we all know, has been around for a while, but maybe not sort of completely pervaded everything, right? So what is the take on that? I mean, is solar energy going to be relevant?
I think it will be. I mean, there are cases now, just recently in the Middle East and also in Brazil, in an auction where we were bidding different technologies in the auction. Solar was at less than $2 per kilowatt, which is almost nothing. So I believe that solar will have a future. It is going to, different studies have shown that a significant portion, 70, 60, 70% of new capacity additions will be solar. And I think it's a bit like a tipping point story. More and more countries are getting on it. If you look at the amount of solar being added in the Middle East, which for a long time we felt would not be in favor of solar because they have so much of gas and oil, we felt that they would be a bit shy to go with solar, but the economics are becoming so favorable that it's hard to argue. So there are many cases where solar is becoming the lowest cost energy source. And so I think it will actually take up or pick up steam more and more in the coming years.
Okay, so you talked about, obviously carbon footprint reduction. Now, what is sort of happening currently at this time in terms of actively reducing it? So I know that you talked about not producing carbon, but what about the carbon that's, so one of the questions is about the carbon already out there. Is there anything actively happening to take it out, so to speak?
Yeah, there are some startups and some technologies looking at it. I don't know too much of the specifics here, but there is a technology called direct air capture, DAC, that has got certain promise. It is still in the very early stage to be able to extract carbon from the atmosphere. But I think these are some really long-term technologies that are being invested in. I don't have the exact number at the top of my head, but venture capitalists and investors have been investing record number of dollars into renewable, sustainable technology startups. And so I believe that as more and more money flows into this field, there will be more and more innovation happening, innovations that we can't even predict right now. So my sense is that if you fast forward 10 years from now, and if you just think about how life was 10 years ago and 20 years ago for us, I think that we will see this sort of an exponential increase in innovative forces trying to find ways to fight climate change. And I believe that some of these technologies will scale up faster than one would expect and find ways to also not just eliminate the production of new carbon dioxide, but also find ways to capture carbon dioxide that is out there.
Okay. Now, in terms of what is coming, you obviously gave us sort of a broad overview of what technologies are getting developed, right? So there is a question about, and which I don't claim to know, claim to understand the question very well, but high capacity, high discharge, and recovery efficiency storage systems are coming in. So could you tell us could you tell us a little bit about what those systems are and what Siemens is doing about those?
Yeah, I'm not a battery expert, but I do know that. So right now, the storage systems we have that are actually commercially implemented, there are some cases in California where we have battery storage systems that can store up to 8 megawatt hours to 20 megawatt hours of electricity to be able to reuse for 4 to 5 hour period, so to speak. So these battery storage systems are becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. So Tesla, for example, is going to be installing a gigafactory in Berlin in the coming year or two. So there is a dramatic increase taking place in large scale, high capacity, high discharge battery storage systems. And we are seeing more and more customers wanting to combine these systems with either a wind farm or a gas turbine power plant so that they can get the best of both worlds. We as Siemens, while we have a lot of proprietary research going on in the area of storage, we also realize that most probably as Siemens Energy, our best bet for success is going to be partnering up. So we don't believe that we have to do everything ourselves. We believe that in the future, the key to success is going to be creating partner ecosystems or innovation ecosystems where Siemens can bring to bear its know-how in manufacturing, large-scale manufacturing, industrialization of processes, global sales networks, global distribution networks, and using the reach and the depth of the Siemens company combined with the innovative ideas and technologies of another company so that we can get the best of both worlds. And that's the sort of thinking we are having in this area.
Okay, so there is another question about some leaders in the world maybe being skeptical of certain trends that are pointed out by environmentalists, and so I'm just trying to keep the question as sort of, I would say, generic and vague as possible. But is there traction, and you can choose not to answer this question, but is there traction, sufficient traction across the world, leaders about this topic, about the environment being having to undergo sort of a repair, so to speak, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean, clearly there is no consensus, or there is no strong alignment across the world, because unfortunately, you know, if you think about the energy system and the energy infrastructure for many countries, if not for all countries, the energy infrastructure is a critical infrastructure that is a national security kind of an infrastructure. So many countries have very close-held views on what their energy infrastructure should look like. They don't want it to be open to any sort of a risk. So it is very difficult to bring countries with diverging needs. And I showed you the 4 archetypes. If you have a country that's an energy hungry country, the leaders of that country have to deal with a set of circumstances regarding economic development, regarding infrastructure development, regarding access to electricity, that is at such a different level than compared to a you know, a green pioneer country, that it becomes very hard to find common ground. You know, over the course of the last 4 to 5 years, I have been personally to over 50 countries, and I have seen how disparate the economic situations are. When you go to Angola or you go to Bolivia and you see what people need to deal with, and then the other next time you go to Norway, it's very hard to find common ground. So I do believe it's a big challenge to start finding common ground in these sorts of global issues. What Siemens tries to do is, being a global company, you know, we don't judge whether one country or one agenda is good or bad. We believe that with our technologies and our solutions and innovations, we can move every country one step forward in their decarbonization journey. If they want to have more wind turbines, we can give them more wind turbines. If they want to get more efficient wind turbines, we can provide them with more efficient wind turbines. If they want to go from onshore to offshore, we can help them do that. On the other end of the spectrum, if they want to stick with coal, because that happens to be for them, the most effective, lowest cost option that also gives employment to their people, then our commitment is we will give them the highest technology possible for coal. So for example, today the average coal efficiency, the coal fleet efficiency in many countries that is on the lower end of the coal technology is somewhere in the 25 to 30% efficiency of a coal-fired cycle. Our most advanced technology can give us technology efficiency, cycle efficiency of about 48%. So if we can take our latest coal technology and bring it to a country that needs to use and burn coal, you can have anywhere from a 20 to 15% point improvement in efficiency, which is huge and can have a big effect on emissions. So we try to provide optionalities to different countries so that they can decide what makes the most sense for them. But to the specific question in terms of alignment and consensus, that will continue to be a challenge, I believe. The world is getting increasingly nationalistic rather than globalistic, and that is not going to make this any easier.
Right, and I think we all kind of need to be cognizant of what you said earlier, right? Is that every country has a different set of challenges, and if they agree to certain things and don't agree to certain other things, then they have compulsions behind those. So there is one other question about tidal energy, and what do you think about that being an alternative source of energy, and what's sort of the future it holds?
Yeah, I mean, tidal energy has been around for a while, and there are some parts of this world, I think, I don't remember all the places, but around the UK, Ireland, around some parts of South America and Australia, there are tidal turbines that are operating reasonably well. The question always comes down to economics and scale. It is much easier to do stuff on the ground at scale than it is to do stuff underwater at scale. So we have to think about scale. So it is always possible to have smaller installations of new technologies in different parts of the world, depending on the specific needs. And that's why you have this huge range of technologies. But the ones that tend to win will always be the ones that can scale up and go from the kilowatt range to the megawatt to the gigawatt as quickly as possible. And this is where wind and solar and coal and gas are really ahead. And then you have to think about the specific cost of electricity. And as long as your specific cost of electricity is, far away from where, like I mentioned, solar can be at $2 per kilowatt. You can have wind that is close to maybe 4 to 6. Gas is 8 to 9. And when you start comparing some of these niche technologies, they don't match up. So I do believe that you will always have cases where maybe if you think about the total distribution across the energy matrix, you will probably have, for now, I'm just picking up some numbers. Let's say today you have 40% coal, 30% gas, 10% hydro, 17% wind and solar, and then you'll always have a little bit of other. The other might be somewhere in the 2 to 5% range for the global energy production. That 2 to 5% bit can be satisfied with these sorts of niche technologies like tidal. But I don't believe that tidal will be able to, at scale, overtake solar or wind and even hydro. So I think that wind and solar have such a head start. They will probably be the dominant technologies for the future.
Okay, so we will take two more questions and we'll stop. So one question is, what can we do as citizens and citizens of the planet, so to speak, to without doing something drastic, without having to alter our lifestyles very drastically? What are simple things that we can do? Any suggestions, any thoughts?
I can't specifically provide any suggestions, because that would be quite presumptive of me, because that would have me assume what is important or not for you. I think for me, the COVID pandemic was an eye-opener. The COVID pandemic showed us that when we are really under pressure and when we are facing a crisis, all of us can adapt quite quickly. I have my colleague on this call, Julia Reed, who is my head of communications. And in fact, she was the one who put all the effort in making the presentation that you saw. So thank you, Julia, for that. She and I were talking this morning, and we were talking about the ability of human beings to adapt. And as long as the need is high, and when the need is high, we will adapt. The way we have changed our lifestyles in the last 2 to 3 months. I could not imagine, having grown up in Bombay, I could not imagine hearing that the streets in Marine Drive, like Marine Drive, were empty. So people have adapted, right? And it took unfortunately, it took a crisis to trigger that. So I think that it's for me, the simple thing would be to look at your respective lifestyles, and both at home and more importantly at work, and ask yourself, what can you do as managers and leaders to make a small change in your sphere of influence? And I'll give you one really interesting example. So for many years, I worked in the US. And in the US, the culture was that you have these coffee stations all over the company, and there are styrofoam cups that are positioned near the coffee station so that people could take a cup of coffee in the styrofoam cup. For 25 years, those styrofoam cups were there, and everybody was saying, well, we should actually stop it because it's environmentally not good. But no one did anything until one young lady, she just started. She said, you know what, I'm going to bring all my extra ceramic mugs from home, and I'm just going to leave them in the cupboards near the coffee station in my workplace. And people can start using my ceramic cups instead of styrofoam. And within about 3 to 4 months, the entire campus in Florida got rid of all the styrofoam cups and just used ceramic mugs. It just took the action of one lady to start something. So I would encourage all of you, you're all training to be leaders and managers, and look at your respective lifestyles, look at your respective workplaces, and pick one thing that you feel is the right thing to do from an environmental point of view, and start doing it in your sphere of influence. And what you will probably notice is that it will start taking hold and have a ripple effect, and you will start moving from a smaller scale to something happening at a much broader scale. Another great example is Greta. Greta was a 13-year-old or 12-year-old girl who just started by sitting outside the Swedish parliament and refused to let people tell her what she needs to be doing. And just look at what happened 18 months later. So, you know, great things start with small steps, and I would just encourage you to think about that.
Okay, great. So the one last question I had was, we get to hear people once in a while talking about net green, and is there a measurement of the impact of changing from one energy source to another? Is the measurement and metric clear, and is it out there in the public?
No, it's not. I mean, you know, it's a very interesting question, because a few years ago I had the privilege to have a dinner conversation with Dr. Stephen Chu. Stephen Chu was President Obama's energy secretary for one term, and prior to that he was a Nobel Prize winner in physics in 1997 or 98. Super intelligent man, and he was making the point that right now, one of the challenges we have is that whatever measurements we have for some form of green is not a full life cycle measurement, and that leads to sometimes misdiagnosis or the wrong assumptions on what needs to be the way forward. So a true net green effect, a true carbon footprint measurement is very difficult to do, simply because the supply chains have gotten, for any sort of product, be it a electric car with a fuel cell or a diesel engine truck, the supply chains have gotten so dispersed and global, it becomes super hard to be able to really come up with a defendable, verifiable score that can be compared across different product lines. So it is something which I believe still needs more work. It's not there yet, but let's see. I continue to have a lot of faith in human creativity.
Great. So thank you very much for taking all the questions patiently. It's been a great 1 hour. I will now hand this over back to Captain Nagaraj for closure. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you for facilitating the Q&A. Thank you for that. And thanks for the questions from everybody. And sorry if I was not able to answer all the questions, but thank you for putting in some really good questions. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Rahul. Capturing carbon dioxide and turning it into commercial products such as fuels or construction material could become a new global industry. So we are in for interesting times. Thank you very much, Vinod, for being on the Distinguished Speaker Series. It's been a wonderful presentation and insightful talk. We had about 150 participants who joined the webinar today, mostly students from the MBA and the Executive MBA programs. So thank you very much for enlightening them. May I invite you to visit us when you are in India, and that would be a real pleasure. I must thank my team for putting up these fantastic webinars, Dr. Rahul Dige, Professor Rajan, Arvind, Mohammad Imtiaz, Malati, and Professor Naveen Sriram. Thank you very much. And thank you, participants, and have a wonderful evening, and we will touch base again. I must remind you to collect your participation certificates by clicking on the link that Professor Rajan has posted. And to remind you, we have Professor Richard Boyatsis from Cleveland, Ohio. He's going to talk on effective leadership from the Case Western Reserve University on Sunday. Then we have Mr. Srinivas Iyengar, who's going to talk about AI and healthcare in the week ahead. And we're going to end with Dr. Han-Wook Lim from Seoul from the Republic of Korea. And he's going to talk on logistics and supply chain management. So thank you very much again, Vinod, and we'll touch base. And it's been a pleasure touching base with you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Wish you all the best, and my regards to everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.